So I'll wait a bit until people get their earphones and make sure that everybody can understand. And I'm awfully sorry I don't speak a word of Turkish. It feels a bit rude to come to a country to be invited in such generous ways and not even to say something like small hello in the local language. I should have, but let's be sure I'm grateful. I'll just wait a bit. You can look at this list of things. I think these are my main occupations. I have to say there's one other thing which is not on it, and it's of no use, but it is a very inspirational thing. So I'm also the president of the Dickens Fellowship Haarlem branch in the Netherlands. So we kind of worship Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens was actually a writer very much in favor of heavy copyright. He did a lot for that. He did a lot actually for authors and for writers to stand up and fight for their rights. And in that way, as well as being a very good writer, he was something to be inspired by. I see there's still people getting their headphones. By the way, and this is in general, if you have a question during my lecture, please raise your hand and ask it. And I'm sure if you ask in Turkish, somebody will be kind enough to translate it for me. Because this can be as interactive as you like, and if there's anything unclear, please ask. The first time I visited this city was in 1985, when I was still a law student in Amsterdam, and very, very young, well, at least much younger than I am today. And it kind of feels almost coming home after all these years, though I've been here in between. It is an amazing city. And I just walked here, passed by, and I thought, I've been walking here 35 years ago, and it is kind of strange that the circle is almost round. There's something similar about 1985 and 2018, and that's not the way I look, but that's the fact that we had a fixed book price, or a kind of fixed book price system by then, and we still have it. So, I think by now everybody has their phones. I've been working as a publisher for over 20 years in general publishing, being the editor of and later publisher of Dutch and translated authors. 5 years ago, I turned to the Dutch Publishers Association, where they asked me to become the secretary of especially the general books. Because I was trained in law, which is a rare combination in publishing in general, they kind of asked me to do this, and later on I became the director of the Royal Association for the Dutch Book Trade. I'll come to that later. I am dealing with copyright a lot, I'm dealing with reprographic rights, and I was very closely involved with the debate on the fixed book price about 4 years ago, so I know a lot about it. This is always what I had in mind, certainly when it comes to general books. The publishing industry is an industry of only prototypes. It makes the industry quite unique, but every time you create something unique. In the Netherlands, we create about 18,000 new books, general books, a year. 18,000 prototypes each time. And I'm sure the figures in Turkey will be about the same. I don't think there's any industry who creates as many prototypes as we do. And that makes it vulnerable, and that makes it also the fact that we have to see how we can protect it. The Dutch has always been an industry that working together. We had a long tradition, and there's a Dutch word called polderen, which has now some international meaning. And it means when you make a polder, which is basically a dried land, it takes a long time before all the water is out and it dried completely, and you have to raise it bit by bit by bit, and then in the end you have land. And it means closely working together. Polderen means that we talk from various sides of the publishing of the industry together to make things work together. These are the founding fathers in 1815, publishers, booksellers, because at those times they were about the same, who actually were worried about the moral decline of the Netherlands and the lack of reading. Something we're still worried about 200 years later, but we kind of survived, I think. So over 200 years in the publishing industry, we've worked together to achieve some things. One of them is a fixed price. And the first privately regulated fixed price system was already in 1905. But in 1924, we had the first net book agreement. I've been asked, can you tell us about the time before and after you got a fixed price? And I'm sure I can't, because before, there is no before. That's 19th century, and I cannot compare, and nobody can compare it to the 19th century. So since 1924, we had a fixed book price system based basically on agreements between booksellers and publishers together. Of course, it was not compatible with the competition laws and European laws, and that already was in 1967. Then it was told, well, this is some kind of special case. The whole system was based on the fact that you had become a member of this KVB, this royal institution, as a publisher or as a bookseller. So you had a kind of recognized system, and you were recognized as an official bookseller or an official publisher, and only then could you publish and distribute books among booksellers. It was a heavily regulated system, and of course it became interesting who could become a member, who couldn't become a member. So most discussions were actually about whether supermarkets could sell books because they had to become a member of this association. All this was no longer upholdable over the years. So we, in 2005, we actually got the first, the first fixed book price. Sorry, I just do this. Yeah, thank you. The first fixed book price by law. And this is what's vitally important. It was based on the French law, which was already from the 80s and 90s by Jacques Lang. But this is very important when you talk about fixed book prices, why it's aimed at a broad variety range of books available at a widespread network of booksellers. Also, quite uniquely, the law states that there needs to be an official evaluation every 5 years. Well, every 5 years, checking almost in Parliament whether a law is still applicable is rather strange for any law at all. Usually, you make a law and it lasts as long as it lasts until Parliament decides it should be abandoned. But in this case, every 5 years, the government has to go into an investigation and see whether the law is still working, whether the aims are still reached, or whether it should be abandoned. And that is actually why we constantly keep evaluating that law. And it's very important, and we'll come to that later on. Now every law comes with a letter from the people from Parliament who actually make the law itself. And this is very important for us. The letters say the law has a cultural, political purpose. And I think when we talk about fixed book prices, this is vitally important. It has a cultural, political purpose. It is not simply to guarantee prices or to protect in a strange way publishers or booksellers any other way than from a political, cultural point of view. So what they said, we tried to create conditions in which, on the long term, a wide variety of books in Dutch and Frisian. I have to say there's 2 official names in the Netherlands. One of them, of course, is the well-known Dutch. Frisian is up from the north. It's a very small language. There's only less than 100,000 people speaking it, but it's still an official language. Will be available through a widespread network of booksellers with a wide and diverse range of books in their shops. That's what the law is all about, and we shouldn't forget that. The most important elements of this law, and I will go through to more detail later on in my talk. First of all, it's only meant for physical books and sheet music. I get to that thing about e-books later on, because that has been. But so e-books and other digital products are not part of it. It abandoned the system of acknowledgement. So everybody can be a publisher, everybody can be a retailer or sell books, which is interesting because, of course, a wide variety. It also means that internet bookstores are simply retailers and sell books as well. Actually, almost 25% of the Dutch market now is served through physical books, so it's served through the internet sales. Textbooks for primary and secondary schools were excluded. The reason for that is that, especially in politics, and I don't know the situation here, but primary, secondary schools in the Netherlands are heavily regulated, and they've got some kind of fixed books which the schools buy. So it's not for the children. So not the children buy their own books, but the school buy them and provide the children with them. It simply means there's no such thing as a real market, certainly not a consumer market. And the fixed book price is very much aimed at consumers. So the textbooks were excluded. The science books, and we come to that later on, were not excluded. One of the reasons is that it's very difficult, we'll get to back, is to determine what a science book actually is. I'm sure we can agree on many things, but for example, if I would study here in Istanbul Turkish languages, I'm sure that a literary novel would be a science book for me. So the comparison is quite difficult. A history book can be read for joy as well for studies. The other definition is the publisher sets the price. We'll come to that later, but which is valid for at least 1 year and can end and only the publisher can end the fixed price. Again, something I'll come back later, but it's the publisher who makes the price. Now let's go back to Europe, because one of the reasons actually we had to go to the law is European laws. Holland is of course member of the European Union, so all our laws have to be applicable with the European laws. There has been some discussion whether the European laws are actually make it possible to have a fixed book price because it's so anti-competition, which is part of it. But what it says is the Union, oh, I'm sorry, it goes down, and I'll read it through. The Union shall contribute to the flowering of cultures of the member states while respecting their national and regional diversity, and at the same time bring the common cultural heritage to the fore. Action by the Union shall be aimed at encouraging cooperation between member states and, if necessary, supporting and supplementing their action in the following areas. And then it talks about the knowledge and dissemination of culture and history of the European people, the conservation and safeguarding of cultural heritage, cultural exchanges, artistic and literary creation, including the audiovisual sector. And also it says, I see I'm back. Yeah, we're here. It said the Treaty on the Function, the Union and the Member States shall foster cooperation with third countries and the competent international organizations in the sphere of culture, and in particular in the Council. Also, the Union shall take cultural aspects into account in its action and the other provisions of the treaties, in particular in order to respect and to promote the diversity of its cultures. So, under these European laws, it is possible to have something completely anti-competition as a fixed book price. Also, there's the UNESCO Treaty, also on cultural diversity. Again, like I said, it's a political cultural instrument, but it has a legal basis in European copyright, in European laws. Now, I want to go through a certain amount of articles, and the first article is a very important article, and it says, what is a book? And that is, of course, something, everybody knows what a book is, but to define it in a legal way is not that easy. First of all, what matters is the language. It has to be written predominantly, it says, in Dutch or Frisian. So English books, or books in Turkish or German books, are not part of the fixed book price system. Those books, even are important, are not a part of it. It's only about Dutch books. It can be translated books from other countries, but as long as the language is predominantly Dutch. There has been a few challenges how far predominantly go, but we would say in general, one knows. The book needs a title. Sounds very stupid, but it's quite important that it actually has. And this is one of the things, it needs to be paper. And this is, of course, the whole discussion about e-books. Now, when this law was set up, and the discussions were in 2003 and 2004, actually Parliament considered e-books at the time to be something probably in the future used only by professionals. Now we know more, and probably very small, so there was no need to put it into this law. Well, we know better now, 13 years later. We might have known better then. Still, there's no e-books in it. There's no way e-books will ever enter it. There are many reasons for that. One of them, of course, is that the distribution, the digital distribution, is cross-border, and it's much harder to check and to control whether a price is set or not, contrary to the physical contribution. Also, with e-books, and certainly these days, when we get subscription models, where actually people can subscribe can list a subscription where they can download a certain amount of e-books each day or each year or continuously. Kobo is doing a lot of efforts in that in the Netherlands. It simply means there is no fixed price. It's much more fluid, because then you just pay, like Spotify, 10 euros a month, and you get an endless amount of books, and that it wouldn't be possible with a fixed book price. So the book is of paper. Curious to see, nobody challenged it ever, but you can make a book of little plastic, certainly for children's book. Technically, that shouldn't be a book under the fixed book price. The other demand is it needs a print run, basically a print run of 2. At the time, again, of the law, and you can see how quickly things change at the moment, printing on demand was very limited, and it was especially limited. It was an expensive machine. You printed just one copy of a book. It was made for somebody special. It had no meaning, and it wasn't actually needed a fixed price because there was no market except for somebody buying that specific book. And it was all very small. Nowadays, what we see is that printing on demand is suddenly taking off. The machine printing on demand, at least in the Netherlands, every print run until about 500 copies in general is being run on a printing on demand machine. The whole idea of printing on demand has changed, and nowadays what we'll see is there's heavy investment by Central Bookhouse, I'll get to that later on, where actually whole books, where there will be a lot of printing on demand possibilities, and publishers might only have their books digitally available, and if somebody wants the hard copy, it will be printed on the spot and available within about 30 minutes and actually delivered the next day. The system is so sophisticated, by the end of the year, you can order a printed on-demand book at about 9 o'clock in the evening, and you get it the next morning at about 10 or 11 o'clock. And now that will be an interesting discussion, whether those books will be under the fixed book price. I estimate they will be, because clearly the aim of the law is to protect fixed prices and to create that level playing field. But there will certainly be some contestant about that, about how that works. So, for example, calendars are not on it. Diaries, brochures, yearbooks. Sheet music actually is, for some reason. But, so it's very much aimed at the book. Now there's more articles, and that is about how is the fixed price determined, how is it dealt with, and how does it end. Well, like I said, the price is set by the publisher. The publisher actually puts it on a website, which is centrally owned by, we got that later on, by what we call the Commissariat of the Media. So every bookseller knows that price. And we'll get to the central distribution system later, which is very important here. But the publisher determines the price, and he determines the price for every kind of edition of the book. If you make a paperback and a hardcover of a book, you set true prices. You're not allowed, and the law is very clear there, to make basically the same book, but just gives it a different ISBN number, and then think, oh, that's a lower price for some kind of special license or a book chain. You're not. the book needs in the same form as they say, the same price. So I think that's quite important. And the price stays. No, I'm going to come back later. Also, when it comes to import of books, it's actually import who sets the price. Again, for Dutch books only. So Dutch books published abroad will have a fixed price set by the importer. Interesting enough, and of course, and that is already in the law, what could have been quite easily is say, I print a book here in the Netherlands, I ship it to, for example, Belgium, and I ship it back, the U-turn code. That is not allowed. I remember a couple of years ago, well, about 8 years ago, there was a company who said they were located at one of the Dutch Antils, I think it was Aruba, and said, no, we ship our books from Aruba, actually. Turned out it was very close to Amsterdam, but, and this is how they tried to avoid the fixed price and sell it under the fixed price, and that was absolutely not allowed. Because there's a fixed price, every retailer has to use that price. It's not a minimum price anymore, it's the set price. It used to be minimum price, now it's the set price. And it simply means that everywhere you buy the book, whether it's a very popular book by Dan Brown or a small poetry collection, the price will be exactly the same. You can't give any discount. And we're going to the upholstery later on, but this is very important. The price is the same. And you're not even allowed to suggest that it's cheaper. There was a chain who at a certain point said, here only 15 euros. Well, the book was everywhere 15 euros, and they've been fined. And I think it's very important to not give that suggestion. After the price is set, and basically that goes on, the setting might be earlier, but it counts until the day the book is published. At least for half a year, that price needs to be the same. After 6 months, the publisher can alternate the price. It can set the price higher, not very likely, but he might, or it can set the price lower. It rarely happens in practice, and one of the reasons, of course, is that there's stock exchange at, for example, booksellers, who then have books with two prices, which will cause all kind of confusion. So, actually, I've never had that, except for a kind of general, let's lower those prices. Only after 1 year, and actually that has changed over the years because it was 2 years, after 1 year, the publisher might end the fixed price. It simply means that the book will then no longer have a fixed price and can be sold at any price. What usually is being done, and it's what we call remaindering, because that is what it's usually for. You just remainder the stock. Booksellers sometimes send their stock back or start selling it for the low price as well, and the publisher simply remainders, or what happens also a lot is destroyed. But for a full year, the book will always have a fixed price. This is also, and I have no idea how big the book club still is in Turkey. It used to be enormously big in the Netherlands. When I came here the first time in 1985, I think the book club had about several million members. Nowadays it's maybe 100 or 200,000, but there are still countries where book clubs are big. Book clubs have an exception in the law, a special exception in various articles, because they can actually give some discount. The discount they can give is about 20%. But there are various things. You have to become a member of the book club for at least a year. Within that year, you have to buy 4 books, at least. Also, you can't just set up a book club like here. You have to be professional. It has to be national. It has to be you cannot set up a book club for example, universities. It has to be for natural persons. Sometimes they can give a little bit more than 20%. So the book club has a special position, interesting enough, within the fixed book price system. Despite that, and what we've seen in the Netherlands, and that's more in practice, is that actually retailers like, well, we have Amazon in the Netherlands, but our biggest retailer in terms of the digital retailers is a company called Bol. One's called Bertelsmann Online. Only actually succeeded in the Netherlands, because everywhere else I think it's completely stopped. It's now owned by the biggest supermarket chain, and of course it doesn't only sell books anymore, but like Amazon, about everything. People tend to buy online there, and people tend to buy less and less in book clubs and less become members. One of the other interesting things about it, and actually this is not from a legal perspective, but from surveys, it turned out that the discount of the books was not the main reason for people to choose for a book club. The main reason for people to choose for a book club actually is that it had a limited amount of books. Those people were quite of thinking, you get into a bookshop and you see these thousands and thousands of books coming all over you, and there's the book club, nicely categorized. All books have been read, there's some description about it, they know about your taste. So that is the reason why actually people became a member of a book club. Of course, nowadays, with the data Amazon or Bol, whoever gets, you will get a much more probably refined personal recommendation for the kind of book you want. So in a way, metadata has kind of exchanged the system. But the book club is a special thing in the price. This is probably the most important article in the whole system. Now, to go back a little bit in time, in around 1870, publishers came together and talked about distribution, and talked about distribution to booksellers, and booksellers were involved as well. At that time, every publisher sent his own books to every bookseller. And they kind of thought, and this is the typical polar model, why not join forces and make a central warehouse where we put all our books together and where every book is distributed to every bookseller. It means that, well, probably at those times, the coach can run with a full load of books to a local bookseller instead of 7 coaches from 7 publishers. Again, 1870. That is called Central Bookhouse, and it still exists, and the shares are still owned jointly by the Booksellers Association and the Publishers Association. Now, one of the aims of the fixed book price was this wide range of distribution. And one of the ideas about it was that every bookseller should be able to order every possible book published without making special agreements with the publisher each time. So, in order to make some kind of general agreement, because this is again completely anti-competition, they set up this article, and it says, it means that any book in the Netherlands, and provided the book recognized as a book in terms of law, can be ordered by any retailer and delivered within a day. And what's most importantly, because the way books are delivered to booksellers in the Netherlands is there's a set price and there's a discount in percentage, which is given to the bookseller as a kind of what he needs. And there's a minimum set discount here in this system, which is 42% for general books. For science and textbooks, it's a bit lower, like 32 and 28%. So any book can be bought by the bookseller for 42% discount. And also, in this case, the bookseller pays for the distribution costs. In practice, and this is quite interesting, of course, most booksellers try to get into agreement, certainly with the big publishers, and get better terms than this, in the terms of the discount and also in the terms of who pays for the distribution. The company that still uses this the most is actually Bol, the retailer, the Amazon of the Netherlands. What they did cleverly is that, oh, fantastic, there's a complete infrastructure in the central Netherlands where all the books are there. What we do is we set up our distribution line right within that distribution center. So we can deliver every book possible to our customers in the Netherlands. And actually, Central Bookhouse ships those books to the customers. So every book you order online from Ball, and actually Amazon does about the same, or they probably will try to do the same. Every book you order from Ball is delivered by Central Bookhouse the same way as it is delivered to a bookshop. They just have a special line. They just have a post delivery every night at 12 o'clock or whatever, and the next morning you've got it. But it comes from there, and they use this system because they said, oh, fine, it's there. And of course, for publishers, it means that they have their stocks at one place, which is a huge advantage. And there's distribution even to Belgium, right from the same book house. Again, stock at one place is really helpful for publishers. And it's all in this article being dealt with. Now, is it impossible to give any discounts or special prices? No. Of course, the whole system is based on a set price, but we do have some possibilities to give small discounts. Students can have, depending on their position, between 5 and 10%. Schools, when they order general books, for example, for their libraries, they can have a small discount of 5 and 10% depending on how much they actually order. The general idea is that, especially for booksellers, if they sell more copies of one book to one person or one institution, it will be cheaper for them, so there's a little bit of discount possible. So also it will be possible, for example, if you support, let's give a free example, the Dickens Fellowship supports some biography of Dickens, then we could distribute it among our members with a small discount of about 10%. That is all being possible. It's used a bit, especially some academic publishers use it for students, but it's not something very common. And also, the 5% discount is not something. It's more of an effort actually to start using it and to support it than it is to give it. But it is done. There are two ways of special prices. First of all, it's possible to set a book at a lower price for 3 months. We call it an action price. For whatever reason, you can decide to do that. You can decide to do it as a publisher for the first 3 months of the book, and then later make it more expensive to make it more attractive to people buy the book directly. In practice, and I've known this, you also do it with books that don't sell very well, and then you think you can add something. Also, sometimes you work, for example, with a newspaper, where somebody with a coupon from the newspaper can get a discount on the book. Usually then the discount price is shared between the publisher and the bookseller. So if you, for example, give €5 discount to the book, €2.50 will be paid by the publisher and €2.50 by the bookseller. It's a system that's been done. It's not the most common system because it's a lot of work to actually get all those coupons and send them to various publishers, etc. But it's been done. Also, and that is more common and that is certainly getting more popular, is the so-called combination price, which means you combine a book with another product. It can be something very small, a little toy with a children's book, a DVD with a book with the novel about it. But what we see now, interesting enough, is a discussion. What some publishers want is actually, if you buy the physical book, you get the digital book free to go with it. Academic publishers want that and use it, so there's a code in the book with which you can download the e-book. But for example, which works very well with a friend and colleague of mine, he does travel guides, called 100% Travel Guides, and he got them all of the cities. It's the book you buy, but you get the free app as well, which you can use when you maneuver into town. We call that a combination price. Officially, it's valid for 6 months. The biggest problem actually here, and I don't know what that would be in Turkey, but the biggest problem we face is the fact that books have a low VAT of 6%, will be 9% from January 1st, I'm afraid. Well, most other products, and certainly digital products, have a VAT of 21%. And the question is how to deal with that together. We've been discussing this with the local tax authorities in the Netherlands for about 5 years now and have not come any closer. Difficult for publishers. The other part, which is very important for you to know, is the enforcement. How do you actually enforce that people maintain the fixed book price? We've done this, and there's a lot of articles about it, as you can see, with what we call the Commissariat van de Media. Basically, it's too far to say it's a special court, but in some ways it is. It deals with media in the broader sense, television, all kind of thing. But they deal with the upholstery of the fixed book price. And if anybody is not keeping up with the fixed book price, they can interfere, they can fine up to 5,000 euros, and they can also do more. We ask them sometimes for advice. They often do actually cases where they fine €1. That's more or less a principal case which is being asked. It's not a lot which is dealt with at the moment, because we're dealing with this for about 13 years, but certainly in the first years there were a lot of cases to see whether the fixed book price is applicable and how it exactly works. But it's very important, if you have a fixed book price, how you deal with the upholstery. One of the problems they're facing in Belgium now at the moment is that they have a fixed book price since about a year, but they don't have the proper upholstery. And I think it's important to deal with that in a proper way. So in short, there are possibilities for discounting, but limited, and in general once a year per title for a limited period, and only the publisher again can set a discounted price. So it's not the retailer who can say, here 20% off. And again, if you give a discount, it goes for every retailer everywhere. The discount possibilities for book club and the Commissariat for the Media. Oh, sorry, I should have got this. The Commissariat for the Media, the Dutch media authority, upholds the rules and can publishers and retailers who break these rules. So this is how it works in short. And this is what I would say in general. It is a political cultural instrument, and also, and maybe even more, in a small area, the Netherlands interfering with the free market mechanism can be justified on the basis of the above. It is a small market. The investment, 16 million people in the Netherlands, another 6 in Belgium, and that's it. And the investments in all these prototypes are as high as any other country, which might have a much higher language. The literary cultural range, including the vulnerable genres, has been maintained over the past years, proven in a report that shows that internal subsidy takes place. I think this is very important. 2 years ago, every time the law is being evaluated and seen how it works, they measure the amount of what they call the cultural titles, which is being produced each year, and also the amount of booksellers and how much they sell. And every year this has been maintained on a certain level, which more or less proves that the law works. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, we had a report from the Cultural Advisory Board asking if we can get some more improvements about the fixed book price and whether it works, and especially about this whole general idea behind it, because that is what is the general idea about it. Because as a publisher and as a retailer, you earn more money on bestsellers because you have to give less discount. You can use that money actually for publishing and selling less, commercial books, the cross-subsidizing, and actually the research which has taken place very seriously by economists proved, in some ways it's always difficult in economics to say how far it proved, but at least it showed strong signs that cross-subsidizing was taking place. For the publishing industry, the general publishing industry, over 60% of the titles published are not profitable. I mean, they make a loss. Then there's a range who makes a profit, and there's this very small range who makes the profit, which makes up for all the losses you make. We used to have the golden 80-20 rule. 20% of the books make 80% of the profit, and by now, for various reasons, probably that's 90-10. Most books make a loss, but publishers still want to publish them. It means that the broad range is available to every consumer, both physically and online. There is no better guarantee for reasonable income for authors than the fixed book price law. authors get paid a percentage based actually on the retail price, not on the net price publishers receive or whatever. So for an author, if the book is published, let's say 20 euros, it will mean that he gets 2.50, 3 euros per sold copy. Actually, we were very good in the 19th century of illegally copying any books. So that is part of it, and the other part of it, and which we've seen, which is interesting also internationally, is that people actually tend to like physical books. There was maybe 10 years ago, or 5, 6 years ago, people thought, oh, ebooks will be 98%. I remember it was Jeff Bezos claiming in 2003 that within a couple of years, 98% of the books read would be digital. So, and it turns out paper actually is still working, and people love paper, and people love reading from paper. And I was just talking to my colleagues about the paperless office in the 80s. I remember that. And since then, we've been printing more than ever. One of the demands was after that to do a research on the cross subsidies. You know, do bestsellers fund low sellers? And yes, they do. We know now for sure. The researchers really went into the books of individual publishers and of individual booksellers, deep, deep down. And it turned out we do. We've started to see what a physical bookshop is compared to the internet bookshop. And what we see now is that the physical bookshop, can add still something to the digital bookshops. There was a quest for more data in general. I'm very happy we founded something for it. This is what we founded 2 years ago. KVB, the Old Society Boekwerk. This is where we get a lot of data. And unfortunately, it's GfK and Central Bookhouse who deliver those data, but never mind. We have a lot of data here about sales, about the amount of publishers, about authors, translators, the market in general. This is what politics demand. Let us show in a transparent way what you actually do and what you actually achieve in turn for the favor of a fixed book price system and, as they say, also a low VAT. There's some interesting figures coming out of here. For example, the amount of publishers. Now, I represent about 100 publishers, and I will say, I do, because I do represent about 95% of the general market. But there are, in the Netherlands, about 5,000 publishers. 37 make about 75% of the turnover. But there are a lot of small publishers, and actually the fixed book price helps them. It's quite easy to publish a book. That is because we have this central warehouse. You publish a book, you send it to the central warehouse, every bookseller and the libraries will order for it. It's not a big thing, and printing is easy as well. So there are a lot of small publishers, but we get the data. Also, there's always the question of, has it affected the general price of a book? Is it expensive? Has it grown more expensive? As said, since we founded the whole thing in the 20s, you know, we've got 100 years of fixed book price. It's very difficult to set before or after. But what we've seen for years and years is that the average price of a sold book is not changing much. It goes up, it goes down. It depends very much, and actually depends very much on whether in a year there's a more expensive bestseller. In 2012, it was a bit cheaper because the biggest seller was 50 Shades of Grey, which was published at 15 euros. But then in 2016, there was a more expensive Dan Brown, and in 17 there was a Dutch title, which was 24 euros, which suddenly sold a couple of 100,000 copies. But as you see, it stays the same. And if you go down this list, it's been about the same average price for years. You do see ebooks getting cheaper and cheaper. But this is about it, 12.5 euros, and that's for a decade. So, in short, because I've been talking for hours, I feel, what are the pros and cons? The law creates a level playing field. Bestsellers pay for bad sellers, the cross-subsidizing, and the culture that does not cost the government anything, because that is the other thing. Compared to many other cultural institutions, the book business gets very, very little. Compared to theaters, compared to movies, it's practically nothing, a couple of million for a literary fund, and that's it. What are the disadvantages? There's no possibility to use one of the 4 P's, or I think there are much more P's these days, but used to be 4. You cannot play with the price. And there is a reason to believe that the bestseller, which will not be heavily discounted if I buy any bestseller on Amazon, but they give me 40, 50, 60% off anyway, will be more expensive than in a fixed book price system. Having said that, we know from the Danish situation actually that yes, the bestsellers go cheaper, but then the non-bestsellers or school books or children's books actually become more expensive. Because it's not like the publishers are not working effectively or whatever. No, it's simply that books which have smaller print runs, etc., will have to provide more for their income. So you get the gap becomes bigger and bigger. So sometimes I feel I'm standing there, but mostly I can turn back. But we have another evaluation in 1919. So we're looking forward to that. We'll see what they will ask, but it will be, again, much focused on what will be the digital developments, how far will ebooks have gone, what will be the influence of internet retailers. Already the Minister of Culture who's dealing with this had expressed her faith in the fixed book price system. I'm reasonably confident we can keep it, but it's always under attack. Strangely enough, and the attack comes from people from the real liberal economic things, like you shouldn't have that in general. Strangely enough, the biggest internet retailer, the biggest internet retailer in the Netherlands, Bol, the Dutch equivalent of Amazon, during the last evaluation in 2015, expressively said, we support the fixed book price. I know that the director does and he likes it. I also know that it felt like this keeps Amazon away from me, because he would get into competition, but their support was important. So, considering the fact that I've known, are there any questions or comments? Please feel free. And otherwise, I'm here, but yes?
Sabit fiyat bir sene sonra yayıncı sabit fiyata sona erdirebiliyor demiştiniz ve kitapçılar istediği fiyattan o kitapları satabiliyor. Fakat yayıncılar çok satan kitaplarını sabit fiyat sisteminde devam ettirebiliyorlar mı bir senenin sonunda? Birinci sorum bu. İkinci sorum da Belçika sistemi yeni geçti demiştiniz. Okurların buna tepkisi ne oldu? Yani kitabı satın alan okurların kitapçılardan, internetten. Bunun korsana da bir etkisi oldu mu? Teşekkürler.
Yes. Well, as far as the first question is concerned, the price basically is abandoned, so there's no fixed price anymore after a year, if the publisher wants to, and then it will be remaindered. Otherwise, he will lower the price or higher the price. But books can have the same price for 50 years or 100 years, and certainly quite a lot of bestsellers do have that price for a long, long time. Of course, in practice, after a couple of years, you make a new edition and set a new price. But there's no reason. The price can be eternal. Now, as for the second question about Belgium, Belgium is a bit of a special country in many ways. A long time ago, a Belgian minister said to the king, "Sire, there are no Belgians." The thing with Belgium, of course, is that although it's a separate country, for a long tradition, the Belgian authors were published by Dutch publishers. So the whole idea of cross-subsidizing, etc., was already meant that actually most Belgian authors were with the famous Dutch publishing houses. Belgium has relatively very few bookshops. They've got one big chain, and what they have is something quite special, which is in Antwerp, which is a book fair at the end of November, where over 100,000 people come and buy their books. What it has done in Belgium, it's a little bit early to say, but there was already a kind of system where people maintained the same prices. So it wasn't completely new what happened. They were not heavily discounting, that was too close. So we haven't seen actually lots of the result at the moment, but we've seen that it works more or less as it has worked, and it works the same way in the Netherlands. Piracy on physical books has not been a problem, and the fixed book price does not affect digital books. I think the answer to piracy is not within the fixed book price. The answer to piracy is a combination of how to uphold, and that is very difficult. We have court cases going up to the European courts which last for 10 years or 12 years, actually trying to block Pirate Bay with the providers. And the other thing with piracy, and I think the real answer is, make sure that certainly ebooks are easily available for a reasonable price, what people want to pay for it. And that is the answer. And maybe subscription models and library models, digital library models, are the answer to it. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Martin, I want to ask two questions. One is, you said 42% discount for distributors is fixed in Netherlands. What is the, is there any fixed discount for booksellers?
Yeah, that's the...
And also, I want to ask for other categories like academic books, is there any fixed discount rate in distributors?
Yeah, this so-called depot agreement, 42% is for general books. The 42% and the other percentages have been negotiated by the Publishers Association and the Booksellers Association. That has been a hard process, I know. For academic books, it's about 28 and 32%. I know there are two different ways of that. And that is for retailers. For example, for libraries buying books for their exchange, the maximum discount is 25%. So they're all kind of set discounts for that. Of course, the 42% is a kind of minimum if you don't have an agreement with the publisher. But many retailers, certainly bigger retailers, have agreements with the publishers and on much higher discounts and on the distribution. But this is the kind of system where you said, okay, I don't have any agreement, or I don't know that publishing house, I just want to order the book. Then you get this. Please.
Thank you. Martin, is there any effect caused by the fact that Dutch books cannot be discounted, but books in English can? Do you see people choosing to read the book in English because it's cheaper rather than reading it in Dutch?
That is a very difficult question. What we see now, actually, over the last years, is a substantial raise in English books being sold through booksellers. But whether that has to do with the discount is not something I would say rightly, because that has been the case for a longer time. I think the biggest reason why people read more English these days actually is because certainly children are raised in English at schools. Schools are now fast English lanes. My children are much further in English and school are much more providing English lessons than actually when I was at school. So I think the main reason, and you can see what is being read in English a lot, is, for example, young adult literature. So the group between, let's say, 15 and 25 reads a lot more English than we used to do. But whether that has to do with the price, might have been part of it, but I think it's much more to do with the fact that they are much more educated and better in English. Because in practice, of course, people could buy a cheaper English book, but it's not that easy to read an English book if you're not properly trained at it. People overestimate their English, and certainly it goes for other languages. Let's not talk about German or French or Spanish. So, yes, and then there's of course the Dutch authors as well. But we've seen, for example, with big things like Harry Potter or Dan Brown, it's vitally important that the Dutch publisher publishes the same title at the same place. And that we've certainly seen at the Dan Brown that it was heavily discounted, the English version, while the Dutch version had this fixed price, which was much more expensive, and there was severe competition there because the gap was huge. Please.
Sabit fiyatı uyulmaması durumunda bunun yaptırımı nedir? Bunu öğrenmek istiyorum. Teşekkür ederim.
It depends on, but it can go up to about 5,000 euros or more. So you get a sanction from the Commissariat for the Media, and so either the retailer gets it. What sometimes happens is that actually a publishing house remainders without, within, you have to announce this that you're going to remainder too soon, and they get fined. I had this once, so you'll be fined, and you have to pay within 13 weeks or so. So it's like a traffic fine or things like that. Yes. Sorry.
Martin, as far as I understand, the main motive behind this fixed price system is to avoid underpricing for competition reasons. What about overpricing? Is there anything binding for the retailer or the publisher for overpricing? We have this issue in Turkey because we have constantly increasing costs, and we have to revise our prices at least every year due to the increasing costs. So the things are quite different in Turkey due to the costs.
Well, the costs are unfortunately rising here as well, but the set price is a set price. It used to be a minimum price, so you could charge more actually than the price, but now it's a set price. So you have to make sure, because it's valid for at least 6 months, that will be the price that covers the costs. Now, fortunately, for example, in the Netherlands, we don't have any inflation for a long time, or nothing substantial. But if you have high inflation, I can imagine that's, for example, that's a problem. But the set price is a set price, and actually, we're getting a huge problem. Now, this goes into details. On January 1st, VAT will go up from 6 to 9%. The set price is including VAT. It means that publishers and booksellers on all the stocks they have on January 1st, and unfortunately that's quite a lot. I think they're already at Central Book House, something like 40 million copies of books just lying there, will get 3% less value. So, yes.
Is there an article in this law regulating the return of the books from the retailers to the publishers?
No, there's no article in the law. It's just, but it happens a lot. But that's between publishers and retailers. It's always on agreements. But it happens a lot, and it's very frequent. And publishers do sometimes suffer from huge returns. And I remember when I was a publisher, especially the Flemish market seems to be, sometimes I thought they had a printer there, the returns as much.
And last question. The central bookstore you mentioned in between. Yeah. Is it a public organization, private?
It's owned by the publishers and the Publishers Association and the Booksellers Association.
And in Turkey, actually, we as publishers, I'm a publisher, children's publisher, publishers have actually announced retail prices, fixed retail prices, but all the competition actually takes place in between. I mean, the discount rates given to the wholesalers or big chain stores, or especially in children's market, there is the issue of, there is the fact that some of schools go out for tenders, and wholesalers give important discounts in those tenders. So actually all the competition takes place in between, not with the retail price, but with those discounts given to different
well, that's very familiar. Of course, you publish a book, you set a price, and then the big negotiation in the selling to booksellers takes place.
So this law actually is not regulating these in.
No, it's still a market law, and of course, booksellers have some power, and publishers have some power, and it's always the balance between the two. So it's still a market law.
Thank you.
Yeah. You had sorry.
How are you auditing all this? Sorry. Okay. How are you auditing all this price system, as an association? How do you, find the violations or that kind of things?
Basically, we are the auditing. It takes place. For example, we've got what I call the Commissariat for the Media. What they do is they have a website where every time a publisher publishes a book he has to set the price there. That website is connected to Central Bookhouse as well, so that's the system. So the price is always connected there. So that's upheld. The rest of the upholstery is up to the Commissariat for the Media. As a publishers association, I'm trying to stay a bit away from upholding and saying to my members, die, shoot. I won't.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions, or is there a quest for coffee? I can see not. Thank you very much.